Awesome. Right, let's go. Hi, everyone. My name's Rachel Barker. I'm CEO of Plastics New Zealand. Absolutely fantastic to have you all with us today. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat. It'd be great to hear from you and have a chat there. Something I've been reflecting on lately is how hard some of these changes towards circularity can actually seem to those who are facing them head on. There's a lot of gaps in our current system and things are changing really rapidly, so it can be hard to keep up. Saying that, when we actually start to work together and really look at creative, innovative new approaches to designing out waste or designing new solutions, both for products, packaging and our system, we do see change, which is really exciting. A good example of this for New Zealand is the shift that we've seen in meat packaging over the last couple of years. You know, well before the government announced that they were phasing out polystyrene meat trays, the brands, packaging manufacturers and retailers were already working together to move away from those to recyclable PET trays. It's now really rare to find a foamed meat tray in the supermarket, even though we're still 8 months or so away from the actual phase out deadline. So just a quick recap on Replastics for those of you who haven't attended one of these webinars. Replastics is a practical online guide and a series of training sessions that are designed to help you transform how you make use of, recover and reuse plastics responsibly into their full potential. It's been designed basically to try and assist you, New Zealand's decision makers, along your pathway towards plastic circular economy. So basically, to start shaping your journey, some of the things that you can do right now is actually go online and download the Replastics guide at www.replastics.nz, as you can see on your screen in front of you. There's a decision tree within that guide that can actually help you walk through some of the areas. You can actually watch the webinars that are up on there. And then later, post our Omicron wave, you will also be able to attend one of our training workshops, which will actually walk you through and help you to plan your journey. Okay, next slide, I think. Sweet. So in terms of what the design guide actually covers, it takes you through understanding the impacts of our current linear plastics economy, right through to designing for circular plastics and shaping your pathway. You can see in the previous two webinars, we actually explored chapters 1 to 3 a little bit more in depth. Those will be on the Replastics website soon. Even if you've been working with products and packaging for years, you may find that you learn some things by refreshing your knowledge and checking these things out. Excuse me. Particularly, you know, the New Zealand landscape is changing rapidly. Now we've seen huge movements over the last few years. We will continue to see huge movements in that as well. So yeah, do refresh your knowledge even if you've been in the game for a while. Okay, I'm now going to hand us over to Samantha and Bree from Circularity, who will be walking us through how you can start designing for the future of circular plastics and the pathways to get us there, which is basically chapters 4 and 5 of the design guide. They're also going to be joined by our guest speakers, Ollie and Evan from Blender Design and Lawrence Olsen from Exemplar. So thanks, guys, over to you.
Kia ora. Kia ora everyone, my name is Samantha. Like Rachel said, I'm an environmental strategist at Circularity and thrilled to be here with you, kind of walking through how we start designing for the future of circular plastics.
And I'm Bree Asmus. I'm a circular design strategist for the team at Circularity and work at bringing that creative design lens to helping clients solve their complex challenges of their EU. And have been involved in RE Plastics and helping Rachel and the team really curate an extensive amount of knowledge into a helpful guide for businesses of New Zealand. So thrilled to join you, and I'll hand you to Ollie and to the team from Blender and Lawrence to introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Ollie from Blender. I've spent the last 15 years working with some pretty cool companies and people in New Zealand, helping them to develop successful products, and over that time I've seen a bit of a shift in the way products are developed. We mostly help, you know, at the front end. We're a team of designers and engineers, but mostly we're a team of thinkers, and we challenge the way that products are developed and the thought that goes into them. Evan.
Yeah, hi everyone. As Ollie said, I'm part of the Blender team here as well. I'm one of the industrial designers. My role is predominantly in the early stage and ideation when people come to see us. And also I'm the sustainability rep here. So basically we're trying to tackle a couple of the issues when customers come to us and trying to challenge their thinking in terms of sustainability. Lawrence.
Thanks, Evan. Lawrence here. I'm from Exemplar. I've been in the packaging industry for nearly 30 years. And currently my focus is on developing solutions, environmental and sustainable on packaging processes and packaging itself, with an aim to a circular economy. Thank you. I'll hand you across back to Sam.
Yeah, awesome. So we're really thrilled to have the three of you here with us and all of you here with us on this webinar to start this kōrero around RE plastics and how it's been designed to ignite and guide this conversation towards how we can all sort of reshape plastics in Aotearoa. So really it's about finding better solutions, enabling you to close your loops and just start to be part of shaping a circular plastics economy for us here in New Zealand. As we really focused on in our last webinar, it takes all of us to make this huge shift that we all want and create this future where we don't have any unnecessary waste and problematic use of plastics materials. We're really enabling plastics to be used where they can retain and utilize their value, and then that happens with innovative use of resources and systems. The way to get there is to redesign our systems, our solutions, and then look at ways to increase the scale of these solutions and the access to them. So it's really about empowering you from today and moving forward with the information that you need to use plastics responsibly. You might have, if you've joined us previously, know that we really heard from you when we were working with Plastics New Zealand, the challenge that the plastic industry faces to moving to a better way to make and use plastics. There's a lot of drivers for change here, and they really sit around three main themes: the changing policies, both domestically and internationally, your desire to do better as a business, and then also from consumer preference to see change. So how we react to that really matters. And so Replastics is giving you the tools to know where to begin and how to start designing for a circular future for plastics. So where do we start, Bree?
Fabulous. Well, it's an exciting place to be, where we're looking at how the circular plastics economy can actually help us answer these calls for change. And today we'll be exploring chapters 4 and 5 and looking at how we design for circular plastics and how businesses can start shaping their pathway forward by following really simple strategies to organize your actions and really redesign your impacts. So as Rachel set up, if you've been following the Replastics conversations, you'll have a pretty good idea of what the circular plastics economy is, the context here in New Zealand, what the plastics landscape looks like, and who to start connecting with. If you're just catching up to this conversation, definitely recommend going to replastics.nz to get caught up and to start using the design guide to get the base level of information to really put this into practice. Because today is definitely about putting that thinking into practice to redesign the impact of how we use and reuse plastics. Fabulous. So where do we start? Well, it starts at the very beginning. Improving the impact of how we make, shape, dispose, use of plastic materials needs to start with how we see and understand the design challenges of how we're using them today. And the fact is that we know 80% of our product-related environmental impacts can actually be designed out. So the design is where we need to start. And the design decisions that you are making is one of the most powerful tools you have in addressing the production, the consumption, and the waste of our packaging and our products. So we need to go back to the drawing board and really lift up and understand our system today and look at where those design opportunities lie. And it's an interesting journey because you'll uncover all sorts of new opportunities and new value you may not have identified before. Fabulous. So let's get started. We'll be taking a bigger look at the bigger picture, mapping out the different paths and looking at how you can connect the dots in the right way and plan those first steps. But first, we need to understand the value that we're working with and the values that we're working with. I'll hand over to you, Sam.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Bree. And so what we're going to do today is start to take you through a set of 3 simple strategies to help you design for circular plastics. But as Bree said, what you already know is that there are many decisions to be made here that can end up being not so simple. So some of you might have navigated these before, where you kind of come up against, do you want to reduce your emissions, or do you want to reduce the total amount of waste? And are you focused on changing the experience for your customer, or changing the impact? And so it's really important that you start by uncovering and validating with yourself and then with your business, what are you seeking to achieve? Is your primary goal emission reduction targets, or is it to collaborate on a product stewardship commitment? Is this focused around a shifting customer experience and using that as an opportunity to make change? Or it might be all of the above. And so the best place to start before you start redesigning your product or packaging is to know and align on those values so that they can help you guide you through the decision-making process. It might actually influence where you start, but it also will influence who you might connect with and partner with to work with on this journey. So getting that right is really important. And I think for all of us here, we've been in there and felt that. So at Blender, we know that this is a really important aspect in your first conversation. So Ollie or Evan, do you want to share some insight into how that's helped you with your clients?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, because we often have people come in the door and they have values that they've set themselves, or certain targets that they want to achieve. And one of the interesting things that we notice is that the product that they put out needs to align with that, right? So the business might know what their values are, but the customers don't. So basically, it's really important to put out what you want to achieve and make that very clear.
Yeah, just to add to that, it all starts with values. We do discovery workshops for every project. It's about the second slide, I think, after the vision and the goal. And then those values are sort of plastered on the wall, and every decision that's made has to align with them. It's as simple as that. We might even go through strengths and weaknesses and plaster those on the wall and make sure that decisions also align with those. Yeah, it is simple, but it's often missed. And it's really important that you get those values locked in and everybody understands them, and decisions are made accordingly.
Yeah, awesome. And I think when we start to get into some of these challenging designs and opportunities here, you can start to really see the importance of that step. And so today we're going to be walking through, like I said, the steps of how you might eliminate, circulate and innovate with plastics in New Zealand. And so what we've got here is this really interesting hypothetical example of a toy doll and its packaging to help us navigate these strategies. And so the 3 of you, we know, have navigated the complexity that comes with redesigning a product like this, that has both the product that uses plastic, but also the packaging, which uses plastic and other materials. And as you can see here, contains a lot of different parts, a lot of different materials, and fits quite a specific need. And so what I'd love to kind of start with before we get into this kōrero is sort of, where do you start when you get given an item like this? When you're looking at the packaging, what do you think some of the first questions you would have, Lawrence?
So just a quick look at that. If that was presented to me, I would be asking, why so many pieces for a start? Can they be reduced? And if I look at the stickers that are on there as well, are they compatible with the product they're stuck to? What materials are actually being used to put this together? So they're the high level, very quick ones. Then you can drill down and say, well, does that cardboard box actually need a window? There's not a food grade item behind it. Is it necessary? So that's where I would start.
Yeah, awesome.
My first impressions are, face palm, like, why would you make a product like this? I mean, so clearly they've got some different values to me, first of all. I mean, second up, it's like, I mean, this is the dopamine hit of a generation, right? So it's all about that unboxing experience, and the product kind of is the packaging and stuff in a way. So you've thrown us a curveball with this example. It's like a really tough example. It's a kid's toy, and so who's the value for? The parents, the kids, and a whole lot of questions come out. But yeah, fundamentally, you know, is this necessary? What does it achieve? What value does it offer?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's what's so interesting, right, about starting with the values, is it's so important to kind of uncover upfront, like, what are we seeking to achieve? Like, you're both landing on what's most important to this experience or to this product or packaging, so that we can start digging deeper and understanding why something is the way it is, and therefore how might it shift. So it's a great opportunity to really start with that.
And as you can tell, it's very easy to swim in those questions. So the circular plastics strategies help you swim in those questions with a really clear guide. So there's 3 steps here, and they start by looking at what you can eliminate. So what can you design out in terms of any unnecessary or problematic plastics that this might not need, depending on the value it's serving. Then we look at circulation. So what plastic materials here can we actually close the loop on? What can we circulate, and how do we keep the value of those materials really high and in flow? Thirdly, it's all about innovation, and this is something that continues. Even if you've got a perfect plastic system and product or packaging, you always continue to innovate. So how do we use innovation here to create unprecedented speed for the solutions and systems we're making? And this could be via new business models, it could be via new product design techniques, it could be through materials, technologies, collection systems. And this goes far beyond what any, as everyone will know here, any customer or user will see. It's in the infrastructure, it's in the back end, it's the really nitty-gritty stuff. And it's important to think here about not just the problem, but it's also the potential value. You know, within a linear system, we're actually losing a lot of value. And it's been measured that in the US alone, this circular approach has the potential to prevent the net cost of US $200 billion leaking out of that system every year. And that would also prevent 24 million tons of plastic leakage into the ocean, and reduce virgin plastic use by 55%, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. So there's some huge numbers there of loss and potential value. So just start imagining what that could mean here in Aotearoa if we're able to implement some of those circular strategies. And to help everybody do that, we've put together, as part of RE Design, this plastics decision tree. So this is designed to really help you work through the steps that you have when you're tackling a product or packaging, like the Dole example, and work through and guide through how you might actually eliminate, circulate, and innovate with plastics material. And if you just click play on that one, Sam, you'll see how that flows through. Or you might have to download the guide and see for yourself. And we'll go through, it's all right, we can go through it later. Thanks. So the first one will lead you to eliminating. Oh, there we go, great. So when you're at the beginning of your journey in designing out plastics, or designing plastics to be circular, you'll find that these steps lead you to eliminating. So eliminating problematic plastic is the #1 priority. And that means removing any materials that are not necessary, that are not reusable, that are not recyclable or compostable, and that contain hazardous chemicals that are likely to be littered or hinder recycling of other items. So for example, Lawrence talked about, you know, stickers of a different material being attached to a product or packaging that would actually hinder the recycling and reuse of either of those materials. And if you roll on, so you can see here within the decision tree, when you're working through your steps on how to design for circular plastics, you will no doubt end up at looking at what can you eliminate, what can you design out. So if we bring that thinking to our Dole product and packaging, we want to consider what we can design out here from both product and packaging. And immediately we can see that there's several types of plastic materials here that are not recyclable curbside in New Zealand, like PVC, and that the packaging also includes plastic stickers on the front, which can often be really difficult to remove depending on what glue is used, and again are from a different type of plastic from the packaging itself. And as the team have said already, we might question the shape and the size of the packaging and whether this actually contains an unnecessary amount of material being used here, and is there a way of designing this out? So now you've got a frame to actually ask yourselves, what can we do here? I'll throw to you, Ollie and Evan, to talk about how you might start designing out unnecessary plastics here, or some of the questions you might have to determine whether or not they are necessary.
Yeah, like I said, a curveball, because it is the number one question is is it necessary? So we start by, you know, defining who is the user and what problem are we solving, and what problems are we solving that don't need to be solved. Those are all the sort of important questions, because it's a kid's toy, and we know that part of the experience of this toy is all of that unnecessary packaging. It makes it a bit more challenging. But yeah, you really just start to challenge, like, are we getting the most value out of all of the material here? And is it doing its job really well for the longest time? So we might eliminate things that aren't adding to that value. Then again, we might have some tough decisions to make where they are adding to the value, but how much? So no silver bullet there. Any ideas, Evan?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was watching a video on this just earlier this week, and basically just watching this guy rip off layer upon layer of that PVC film, just unboxing this thing. And it's the real experience, or the problem you're solving is you're entertaining it. It's keeping the kid amused, right? And maybe there's ways of sort of like providing that same solution but in a different format. So, you know, instead of these PVC layers, can those actually just be like little cardboard boxes that you're still opening and you're enjoying it, but it's not a problematic plastic that you're peeling off and throwing out. You know, you're replacing that for something else.
Yeah, awesome. And I think there's a really good question of the length of time that this material serves for. Is it a durable long-term service, or is it actually quite short-term, in which that cardboard packaging might actually be a good option to eliminate the current PVC, or you're designing a packaging that, like you say, Ollie, is part of the product experience itself and actually has a longer role to play. Lawrence, is there anything that you...
Sorry, Ollie? Big opportunity with a product like this, but we'll get into that with innovation steps, I guess.
Yeah, so just picking up what Ollie and Evan was saying, they come at it from a slightly different angle where I would, and starting right up front about the value, where's the drivers, etc. So my position will be the materials, and because I like to focus on a circular economy, immediately the PVC is a no-no, and that can be replaced by a PET. And like I said earlier, the window, completely unnecessary. Often they don't get peeled off when it's thrown into the curbside bin. It's not necessary. And that window does contaminate any cardboard or paperboard recycling. Even though it's a plastic, and we're all plastic people, that's still unnecessary in this case. So starting with materials first, what material can be replaced that can be added and make this more functional or just as functional? We can also look at maybe these dolls can be recycled on or repurposed on. Can it be part of another system where it can be gifted on rather than going back into a recycling stream, perhaps? Maybe we can set up a library.
Absolutely.
That's for the brand owner to decide to work with, you know, the next step rather than a one-off piece for one child.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll dive into that and when we start talking about how do we circulate these items, and then also how do we scale up with innovation. So those all bang on. And Sam, is there anything else that we should be thinking about here when we're looking at designing our problematic plastics?
Yeah, exactly, Bree. So I think what's really been highlighted here, right, is there's a number of questions that you can start diving into when you're thinking there are materials here that are problematic. How do we eliminate them? And so the guide lays out some of the first things that you can think about, some of the questions that you can ask to help narrow your thinking in some ways, or focus your thinking, I should say, around understanding the functional needs of your packaging or your product. So all of these questions are really circling around what is the function, and then how can we think about it differently? And then that leads you into things like what are the transportation requirements, and how might we shift that? Or does your product or packaging contain any hazardous substances? And if it does, what could we remove or replace from those? It's really about looking at different production methods or different packaging geometries How might these be adjusted? Is there scope to adjust them? And then what would the ideal state be? And that really starts to lead you into more of those innovative solutions that might hit multiple values or drivers and goals for you that you identified to begin with. And so really what we're looking for here is, can you design out these materials entirely? And if you can't, what could you do to eliminate the excess? So we really want to start, these questions help you to start your thinking and unlock new perspectives on how you might design that packaging or product. So who might we be connecting with if we're going to start asking these questions, Bree?
So we cover this off in quite a lot of detail in the design guide, and some detail around who these people are in New Zealand as well. So definitely check it out. But you want to think about connecting with manufacturers to understand what replacements are available for any problematic materials, plastic materials you have, and if there are any different design, material, or manufacturing methods that ensure that your product may not become problematic at the end of its life. You want to think about connecting with retailers and seeing how a change of packaging might impact on display or transportation, because any decisions you make here are obviously going to have resonating effects. And also partnering up. How can you work together to align objectives and achieve more? So you might actually find that there's aligned values, going back to that point. Consumers. So we all know this is a bit of an elephant in the room as well. You know, how do we communicate with consumers to ensure that they understand and support any design changes? So if we're making these changes, it comes with the responsibility to ensure that they are acted upon. So how do we make it really easy and desirable to act upon in decisions or any actions required post-consumption? You want to think about connecting with researchers and tertiary institutes to make the most of any new partnerships or new innovations that are surfacing. And you want to start thinking about connecting with local recyclers and reprocessors. These are the people that actually make things really happen and can be help you overcome any challenges, and also in trialing new product designs. Keep an eye on your local and national governments to understand what materials are being phased out, and any of those curly questions around stewardship and schemes. That's always good to know as well. We'd endeavour to keep this updated in the design guide as well. So overall, getting to know these players will help ensure that your design decisions here are most effective and they're appropriate to the system and infrastructure you're working with, and ultimately enable the desired impact that you're looking for. So an example of this one is on the following page, which Sam will take you through.
Yeah, awesome. And so really, I mean, Ethique, I'm sure many of you have heard of it, of the brand. It's a really great New Zealand innovative success story, and it's designed out a huge amount of the environmental impact that typically comes with packaging and beauty bars and concentrates through creating concentrates. And so what's really interesting about Ethique that we want to reflect on here is just the nature of the process they went through. You know, really thinking about what is the experience or the function that our product is providing. It's providing a cleaning product for your body, essentially. And so then how can we rethink how we provide that service? How do we create a really good experience in a way that maybe looks a little bit different to what it did before? And so by really going back to that functional needs, thinking about what is the function, they were able to redesign their product, which also allowed them to redesign their packaging in a way that sort of met their needs and met their values, which again connects to the opportunity to align to your values. So they were able to remove more water from the product, remove the need for packaging, plastic packaging, which has really challenging recycling options in Aotearoa, ultimately reducing both unnecessary plastic waste, but as well as water usage. And so it's a great example of the rethinking the functionality, looking at new ways to provide that service, alignment to values, and then ultimately being able to achieve the goals that you have around eliminating problematic or unnecessary plastic. So you might work through this process of looking at eliminating unnecessary plastic. You might have found ways to do that, but you may be at a point now with your product or packaging where you're still using materials, and particularly in this case, plastic materials, which often ends up being the case. So that's when we start to look at how can we circulate those materials? How can we ensure that all your resources are utilised in a way that extracts their full potential? Designing for closed loops like reuse, product life cycle extension, keeping it in flow for as long as possible, and then ultimately enabling it to be recycled so that it can continue to stay in the system or be composted. Again, this is all about retaining the value of these materials by keeping them in use as long as possible.
Fabulous. So again, in the design guide, you can work through this decision tree to prompt what questions you should be asking and investigating with your solution or your challenge. So once you have gone through that phase of elimination, we'll guide you through and prompt the steps to take to circulate your plastics within these closed loops and to increase the value of materials in your flows and increase the value of reused, recycled materials. And you'll find that here we've got reuse as being the first priority. So continued reuse over time through to being followed by recycling, and then lastly by composting, which flows the value through into other natural systems. We also prompt you to consider ways of increasing the circulation of plastic by increasing the recycled content of plastics and recycled content of materials in your products and your packaging as well. So reducing the reliance on virgin materials. So putting this thinking into practice, for example.
Yeah. So for the LOL dolls, kind of coming back to our steps, after the great advice and reflections that we had from the team here and working through the guide, we might have eliminated all the unnecessary plastic by removing those additional layers. And so now we're looking at how can we support that circulation through recycling, through reuse, through recovery, through product life cycle extension. So we might be applying that to the to the packaging, but also the doll itself. And so we're starting to think, how could we ensure that all the materials in both of these are able to be circulated, and how can we keep retaining their value in the economy? What we often find with examples like this is that someone might be looking at circulating packaging, but be redesigning the product at the same time. And that's sort of what happened with Effique. So we know there's a lot of materials to be circulated here with the actual dolls themselves. So Ollie and Evan, when it comes to the product, I'd love to kind of hear how we keep these materials in flow for as long as possible.
Yeah, I mean, looking at all that packaging, I feel like this is an opportunity to educate our little ones in recycling. What if you made a little recycling trash can or something as part of the set? But you know, when you look at the toys or any product, it's all about extracting value for the longest time. And there's so many layers to that. You know, there's durability, right? There's timelessness in the design, which which is a difficult one, but this is kind of like a fad probably, which is dangerous. But you can think of other clever ideas about, continuing to add to the range might help people keep the range longer and use it longer. But being kids, they'll grow out of it. So maybe a better option is actually to create some sort of sharing or trading platform so that other kids can use these toys. I'll pass over to Evan. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with all these points there. There was another interesting one that I think Rachel just mentioned in the comments as well, is that, you know, if you are creating all this waste from your packaging, can that somehow add to the product experience? Like, you know, if you've got plastics in the packaging itself, can that become almost like little bricks to build up a house for the doll, you know? So it adds to the product experience and also then prolongs that material as well. So it gives it another purpose.
I think
just to finish off from a materials point of view, the obvious drop-in for PVC will be PET or even polypropylene. Those ink pots are totally unnecessary in the way they're designed, and the number of pieces they can be molded by reducing the amount of them.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, it's awesome when you're able to uncover these ready materials that are there. And that's, I mean, one of the key drivers of the guide itself, and the tables in the guide that explain what's recyclable curbside. So where you've got packaging, like Laura just pointing out, there you can clearly understand what materials are there for you. And then what I love about this conversation is really thinking just outside the box around what is the actual experience that we're providing. Again, when we're looking at packaging, it's often functional around transport, but around the product itself, what is that experience and how could we completely think differently? And I love the idea of the timelessness, you know, it's that Lego, it's that sharing, it's that making it something that people want to pass on across generations to different to different people in their family. It's something that everyone values because of the timelessness. So I think that's an awesome word that I'll be taking forward with me.
I think you really have to hone in on what problem you're solving. So if this toy is about a dopamine hit, like a quick use, it's all exciting, and then they throw it in the corner and never touch it again, why make it out of some plastic that can last a long time? Why not make this out of like a water soluble biomaterial, maybe the product? Well, alternatively, in the Lego sort of example, you're actually making out of like a high quality plastic that's going to last for generations that you can keep clipping and building on. So it's like, do you want a durable plastic that's going to last longer, and you actually want to use more of it so that it lasts longer because you extract more value over time? Or do you want it to actually just disintegrate? And in this example, perhaps yeah, there's an option to make this out of something that doesn't last very long.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, again, that's sort of that chapter 2 is really about the function of plastics. And for many of us, it's really coming back to that. What was the original intent and function of bringing plastics into our economy, and really starting to appreciate, like you say, the durable nature of them and using them when we need that rather than for a very quick short-term life. So Bree, what other questions do you think that maybe we could start to think about to circulate through closed loops?
Yeah, nice. So we started touching on these already. It's thinking about how do we extend the life cycle of your product or packaging, or perhaps, like you're saying, Ollie, minimizing that life cycle completely. And then you might want to start thinking about reuse models as well. So if you're not thinking about the doll example and you think about other products, how can you use reuse models like refill at home or refill on the go, return from home or return on the go, and really enable consumers to not necessarily buy your product, but actually lease or hire your product. So it's a shift in the model mindset there. And when you're looking at designing your product or packaging for recycling, really understanding what those collection recovery systems are, understanding your curbside recycling, understanding the stewardship schemes, and how you can really leverage the existing infrastructure that's out there. That's an important one as well. And I think that the other important one there is if there isn't a stewardship scheme in place, can you create it? So it's really important that we're at a point in time in New Zealand where we need to actually take a lead on many of these initiatives and create the systems to replace the old ones. So who can you partner with to create systems that serve the point of your product or packaging better? How can you take responsibility and turn it into an opportunity, leveraging what's existing, but also tapping into new systems? So those are some of the questions that we can start asking ourselves. And one of those questions, which I would really like to discuss with you guys while you're on the panel, is how do we communicate these changes with our consumers, and how do we get them involved in the uptake of these changes? For example, with, imagine that toy example, you could actually return it. How do we communicate that to our consumers and create real clarity on the closed loops that we've set up as businesses? So I might throw to you, Lawrence, first to actually talk about the role of brand and communicating closed loop systems to your customers.
Sure. One of the big gaps I see in our country is from the original brand owner through to retailer to consumer. How do we recognize on pack what we can do with that end of life, whether it goes into a soft plastics recycling or a curbside, or it goes into our trash bin? The labeling laws are not robust enough. We've got too many confusing symbols around, and I'll address that later as well. So it's very important between brand owner and particularly retailers getting that connection. How do we get this message across to the consumer and put them very simple, either words or a logo, what to do with that product? At the moment, we don't have any national standardization. And like I said, it's very, very confusing.
Thank you.
Second everything that Lawrence said. If we can have a system that is consistent across the country, across the globe, and consistent messaging and regulations about what is communicated on packaging, that would go a long way. You can't teach old dogs new tricks as well. So maybe we can put a lot of emphasis on educating at school, young kids about this, which I hope is happening. and not fall into greenwashing traps. Compostable I think can be a bit of a craze, because most of compostable packaging doesn't actually end up where it needs to go. And it's really just an easy way of depreciating the value of something, when a recycled package can be turned into some more packaging. So it's a big problem to solve this, isn't it? That this education.
Yeah, and I think it lends itself to those nudges that you were kind of talking about before, right? Was part of that experience that we touched on. How can you build it in to be part of that experience? So you're communicating with them in maybe a way that they're not expecting, but a way that's just encouraging that behavior. And what you talked about, Lawrence, around simplifying the material and using one that's readily recyclable. So the behavior that they're expecting to do, people expect to be able to put something in their recycling bin as it is actually part of the design. So we're actually designing things to line up to people's expectations of how that might be reused or recycled. So we're not complicating it. Part of the communication is making it simple and feeding into their natural behavior.
I look at some labeling on supermarket shelves, and there's too many words. At the end of the day, the consumer looks at the decision to make to purchase that product is built on some fundamentals. To read what happens with it at end of life is not one of those. But if the message was very clear, like a logo, for instance, it'll jump out.
Yeah.
They'll generally just look at a nutritional panel or the brand itself. Everything else is lost.
So simplification is essential.
If your product exists in sort of a bit more of a closed system, you've got a lot more power to solve that. For example, water bottles at a festival, if you're selling that water, I think you have a responsibility to ensure that the collection system enables those bottles to be separated, within that festival. So if we can replicate that as a country or as a whole, that'll go a long way. Or if your product is significant enough that you can control its end of life, or partner up with, like you say, like recyclers, and then I think partnerships are pretty key here, like talking to your local recyclers and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also unexpected partners. So when Circularity was doing some work with EcoStore on their closed loops, it's actually looking at, those collection points may be different to what you expect. And for example, schools, and how do you find these ways of closing that loop that are more convenient and that actually help with that education as well, involve more people in the family and closing the loop and actually returning that product to be reused. So on that note, Sam, who else can we connect with to close these loops?
Yeah, so you'll start to notice that through each of these stages, looking at eliminate and circulate, the guide really lays out for you who you might connect with and some of the questions that you might ask and what you might be hoping to achieve. And like Ollie pointed out, the manufacturers, the retailers, those who are actually involved in the actual process and the supply chain are really important. So by talking to the manufacturers, you can understand how you might be able to design for existing recovery systems. So there are actually a lot of recovery systems in place, and the more the conversations that are floated up through Replastics, the more we're starting to uncover that there is underutilized assets in our system. So how could we design for those recovery systems? When we're looking at communicating, like Lawrence said, with the consumers, how can we partner with those retailers to encourage them to both use the systems that are in place, and particularly if we're introducing new systems, if we're introducing reuse systems, what nudges, what subtle behavioural cues can we put in place to help them return that? I mean, it's how can we fit into people's existing behaviour, or could we use digital platforms to enable people to understand and track where their materials are? The Ministry of the Environment and local and central government continue to be really important when you're looking at Circulate, because we know that we are seeing more mandatory and voluntary product stewardship schemes in place. So how might you connect with those and design for those systems as they're being co-created nationally? The recovery partners and recyclers, of course, are critical. So by understanding how plastics are currently collected and sorted, you can better design for those systems. Like we said, ensuring that you've got the simplest material, the simplest design, and the actual structure of that design enables them to recognize it and process it when it comes through. And that's the same for both products and packaging. And then the reprocessors and remanufacturers, they're doing that really hard money at the end of its useful life to remake it into something new. So how can you connect with them to help design something that's actually going to be financially viable and have value? They're going to be the ones to kind of help you understand that, and also to understand what systems you might utilize to retain that value. And we know that there's some quite specific requirements in New Zealand for each of these recovery partners. And so the guide has really outlined some of these in more detail in tables and forms that are easy for you to reference and will be updated as they change. So Bree, maybe do you want to share a couple of examples of what this looks like?
Perfect, thanks Sam. So for example, if you're looking at choosing plastics, they will need to be collected through curbside services. We've got a guide to what's possible here, and like Sam said, we'll be continually updating this. It gives you a really good idea of kind of issues around colour or what to avoid, or what you should be looking out for. So that's an example of that one there. On the following page, we've also got a guide here in terms of designing packaging for recycling, and this picks up on our conversation is how do we make this so simple and so easy to do that consumers can easily dispose or return of the packaging in a really responsible way, because it's important to extend the mahi you've done up to this point and designing a closed loop. You need to do that extra mile of making sure the materials end up in the right place. And there's incredible opportunity here, as we've been discussing, to lift the base understanding of New Zealanders across the board around how we're using our materials and the impact of that to improve it. Yeah, awesome. And one of those materials that we should all be aware of is
compostables. So we've talked quite a bit about reuse, product lifecycle extension, product life extension, and recycling. And so we just want to mention that compostables and the nuances around compostables are laid out in some detail in the Replastics Guide. And the reason for that is because we're continuing to see that we need to be cautious about how we reuse it. So the key point to highlight, if you haven't been made aware of this already, is that there is a risk of these compostable plastics that are coming into our system, ending up in the recycling. And that's something that we really want to avoid at all costs, particularly with both curbside and soft plastics collections. So we know that we need specific collection systems for those compostable plastics to actually be broken down and utilised through a closed loop system. And that's separate to the recycling system. And so we've laid out in this guide some detail around how you can design to ensure that that takes place. But when it comes to circulation, we've just talked through quite a lot of challenges, but opportunities. And so we're also seeing, as a result of these conversations, some really innovative designs to circulate materials in Aotearoa. So Bree, maybe do you want to share an example of someone who's done this really well?
Yeah, fantastic. Let's touch on Kahuku Natural. And it's also really important to think about, if this is a zone that you're moving into, reaching out and talking to the people who design these systems to garner the learnings from their experience, and to make sure that more and more New Zealand businesses are able to close the loop on our plastic materials. So Kahuku Natural have introduced this reusable refill bottle that can be circulated numerous times within the system. And what this has done is it's eliminated single-use packaging. It's circulating these refill bottles, and at the end of the life, they've set up the system to repurpose them through TerraCycle into playground matting and running tracks. And what we particularly like about their thought process in this is they've thought about the space saving as well in transit. So you'll see there on the right, they've got a foldable, rollable silicone soap refill system that again can be reused multiple times, and it can actually be folded up to save space. And this is something that you'll consider in your trade-offs of your impacts as well around emissions and space and durability versus short term. So it's a really nice solution to one of their considerations. And that space saving is something that Ollie and Evan will be talking about as well later on in their product designs. So that's a good example of a circulate system. And Sam, if you want to jump into taking us into innovating for circular plastics.
Yeah, awesome. It's a great connection too, as we think about innovating. I mean, we know that these sorts of products are really tricky. There's a lot of challenges to work through. And so starting to think about the full system that you're working in and how you might think differently as we innovate is such an important part of this puzzle. So after eliminating the plastic that we don't need and circulating the plastic that we do, we need to innovate really to increase the access to these circular solutions at unprecedented speed and scale. It's words that we keep using, but the nature of this challenge means that we need to enable people to move faster, and we need to enable more people to access these solutions. So we want that systems-wide change to truly see a circular plastics economy here in New Zealand. This looks like designing new business models, new product designs, or maybe new partnerships for collecting systems. So it's really looking at, once you've designed it to be circulated through whichever model that you've chosen, whether it's reuse, product life extension, repair, how is that actually taking place in reality, and how are you enabling the different players in your system to take part and ensure that it achieves its full potential. It's about taking responsibility beyond the tweaks to your existing product or packaging and completely rethinking, but also designing for the full system of making, selling, and then taking back. And so we're really looking to how can we be a leader in the design of your system or service here.
Fantastic. So returning to our Dole example, we worked through eliminating unnecessary plastics, circulating the plastics that do hold real value for us with new closed loop systems, and now we're moving into innovate so we can scale that impact and the opportunity that these new solutions hold. So keeping that in mind, if we think about the Dole example, how might we go beyond the materiality of the toy and the packaging to, like we started thinking, how do we reimagine the expected behavior around that toy? How can we tap into other models such as product as a service? So perhaps this becomes a subscription model where it's not just a one-hit dopamine and then that's it, it goes to landfill. Or can we connect in with toy libraries to ensure that the toy is on-shared to those that may not have access to a product like this? So the question here really is, how might we retain the value in these toys for longer? Possibly by retaining and by offering repair, upgrade, or innovative models. But how do we retain that value in a way that's desirable and attractive to the user? So that's where our business models really comes into play. So we've been having some discussions behind the scenes with Belinda and with Lawrence as well. So it'd be great to share some of those thoughts on how we can retain the value. And I'll throw to you, Ollie, first to talk about some of your guys' thoughts.
Yes, I think that the main thought here was like, be more like Lego.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think also when you're looking at innovating, don't get constrained by innovating the product, because that's only one part of it. I think to innovate for the circular economy, you have to think far beyond that. You have to think systematically, and you know, it's going to take a shift in business models. So like Bree said, you know, if your purpose is to provide joy and entertainment for children, there might be other ways to do it other than selling widgets. You might be able to sell a subscription to those enjoyments, and that could be done through getting the most value out of those widgets. You know, it's like if your business model shifts to providing value rather than selling objects, it completely changes the way you think about it. And one example might be, you know, if you need your lawns mowed, do you go and buy a lawnmower, or do you go and hire a lawnmower man who uses his lawnmower to mow the entire neighborhood's lawns? So like, why do we all own lawnmowers? I'll leave it at
I like the noise. Yeah, and just picking up on what Ollie was saying there, it comes back to what he originally said. Is it going to be a one-off purchase and then recycled? If that's the case, you can design materials to suit. And the messaging has to be there quite clear on pack as what to do with it end of life. In terms of composting, I don't support that path. It has to end up somewhere that's going to be reused, whether that's through recycling or repurposed through a library or through charities or whatever. And therefore, that could be a different design model for that particular toy. So coming back to Ollie was saying, you've got to understand where it's going to end up, short term or longer term.
The hard part with all these is that you really need to incentivize your customer as well, because it's all very well and good to design a beautiful system, but the continuation of that system is in your customer's hands. So you really need to somehow make sure that that is going to happen.
Yep, fabulous. And so once we've landed on innovation that we're really wanting to work with, and perhaps it's a subscription model, how do we then take that forward to really dial up that scale and speed? What do we need to think about here, Sam?
Yeah, so when you're starting to design those innovative solutions, you might be thinking about what we really want to encourage you to think about, to be honest, is how can you lead your industry by redesigning these systems for reuse or upgrade or repair, by taking on the opportunity to design for that system and then taking responsibility for the end of life. How can you guide and educate the consumers, like we've said, and how can you retain the value and respect the material's value? So if this is like we keep pointing on, if this is going to be a short-term use, how could you extend the number of uses it gets? Or if it's going to be a long-term use, how can you ensure that it's durable so that it actually stays with that person for as long as possible? We've had quite a lot of conversations about the need for communication, for education, and for thinking about the full system. And I think it's just quite important that we just sort of pause here to reflect on just any last thoughts that maybe we have around the innovation system. So Lawrence, you've talked a bit about the need for on-pack, where someone's seeing it, what to do with it at that point, where they're looking for the information. Is there any kind of easy wins that we could look towards to kind of increase the scale of our existing systems here?
Sure. I mentioned earlier before about the confusing symbols. When a consumer or Joe Blow picks up a pack and sees a symbol, often they're confusing the resin code or the resin identification code, like a 1 with the arrows going in a triangle, as being recyclable. So if you turn that to a number 3, that's PVC, obviously not recyclable. So that's very, very confusing. And I see other brand owners bringing out their own logo style, which is not consistent anywhere. And is it able to be recycled? Don't know, because it's a completely different logo that you've seen anywhere else. I firmly believe we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and we need, from central government to local government to recyclers, to clearly understand where we want to end up. And I take the example that Australia has done and brought out the ARL, the Australasian Recycle logo. That is very simple, very easy to use, and a number of brand owners in New Zealand are signing up to it. The supermarkets, our 2 big retailers, have, because they know that Trans-Tasman, when products are flowing across, the ARL embodies whether it's going to be able to recycle or not, whether it's through soft plastics or curbside or has to go into trash. So personally, we need to adopt one national standard, and something like the ARL makes sense.
Yeah, that's a huge opportunity, I think, for that industry to come together to lead that change. And like Rachel reflected on the beginning, right, about getting ahead of changes that we know are going to need to happen. How can we work together to create demand for that change is really the opportunity now, when we know it's a system that has worked.
Yeah, we don't need to invent anything else. We've seen government intervention now on inventing systems, even under COVID, which if we use overseas experience, we would have been well ahead of the game. And we can be ahead of the game. And I'm not pushing ARL for the sake of it, but I've had experience with it. I know in Australia it's working very, very, very well. Brand owners in New Zealand are starting to buy into it, literally. But again, to go the next step to the consumer in New Zealand, the education piece is missing, is about that logo. So we need to be on board with something at least.
Yeah, totally. And Ollie and Evan, is there any other ways that we might think differently about enabling our consumers to use these new systems, particularly when we're kind of getting away from curbside recycling with products, and we have to think about a different system with like lesser clear rules, really?
I don't think we should put too much responsibility on the consumer. I just think as product owners, we need to take responsibility for the end of life of our product. Even if that doesn't mean you're committing right now to collecting that product back in 10 years. I think the mindset just needs to change to providing value for the longest time, and not, selling them a new version in 2 years' time, like fast fashion. We want to get away from that mindset. We want to be, taking responsibility and not trying to pass it on to the consumer to make some decisions as well. Like what if you make a product, what if you had to buy it back in a certain number of years for a certain percentage of what you sold it for?
Yeah, how would that change your mindset around what you would use and how you design it? Yeah, that's an awesome question. That's really helpful.
How might it change the layout of your factory?
Yeah.
And the operations of what you do?
Yeah, and the number of pieces and the layout of those pieces. And yeah, that's super valuable. Awesome. And so Bree, maybe you could take us through who we might connect with to understand what's possible. If we've got that question in our mind of we're going to have to take this back in 3 years, who do we connect with to understand what would be possible in the system?
Absolutely. Well, you definitely want a very connected system, so those connections are vital. So who would we connect with? Manufacturers, retailers, consumers in the communities, Ministry for the Environment, recovery partners and recyclers, and of course the reprocessors and manufacturers. So for our makers, we'd be wanting to understand what's actually feasible to be done here and scaled in New Zealand, keeping it within our land. And then also how we can maximize the materials we have in Aotearoa. How do we maximize the recycled content here? With our retailers, we'd be looking at creating closer partnerships for those recovery schemes so we can buy our products back, and how we might develop a closer connections through this new system. For our consumers, and I definitely agree with you there, Ollie, I don't think it's a passing the buck of this is on them to get it to the right place. I think the question here is what recovery systems can enable them to do that last push to get the material back to the right place for reuse, for circulation. And then also going beyond that, how do we educate and help influence behaviour that leads preference for these new innovations and solutions? So how do we create the rising tide that demands circular products, circular services, your lawnmower man instead of buying endless numbers of lawnmowers? So those are some of the stakeholders we're wanting to connect with, and every single one of these is important, because if you go to the next page, innovating with plastics, circulating with plastics, designing out unnecessary plastics all requires a really good base understanding of the players in your system and the roles they play. Without that, you can't really create new opportunities or unlock the value that is currently there. We heard some really big numbers around the value the circular plastics economy holds. You need all of these players in your system. You need connections with them to be able to unlock that value. So again, you can explore some more detail in the design guide and get to know your system so you can know the flow back to you. But an example of someone doing this really well in New Zealand is Critical Design. And the reason why we really wanted to call attention to the innovation of Critical Design is what they've done in terms of connecting across industries to turn wasted resources into high value products for businesses with similar values. And what they're doing isn't just going unnoticed, it's creating consumer behavior change as well. So for example, when you go to Coca-Cola and you get a coffee, the conversation's right there on the counter for you to have. So it's these subtle changes in behavior that will again help us create that unprecedented speed and scale for change. An interesting thing to note is that the technology has existed for years, but what Critical are doing is they're using it in new ways to increase that scale, that access, and that visibility. Even Prince Charles is wearing one of their products or their helmet actually. So that's the opportunity we see here, and taking responsibility for our waste, but turning it into an opportunity by closing these loops and actually going beyond that to innovate new solutions.
And it really goes back. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
So ready to talk about this point. It's
So
just,
ready,
what it really
you go.
goes back to is that, you know, plastic is designed to be durable, right? And so again, we're creating a conversation around let's use it in ways that allow it to last for a long time. Let's create products that we want to be with the same person or in use with various people for a long time. And so let's utilize it for what it's best for, rather than those dopamine hit experiences like Ollie touched on. And so really, as we kind of come to the close of your decision making around eliminate, circulate, and innovate, what we want to think about is what can we learn from the real world examples and the design practitioners to design better with plastic every day. And so we're really lucky now to be able to spend just a little bit of time with both Ollie, Evan, and Lawrence looking at the learnings, the insights, and the iterations that they might be able to share with us around how they've helped clients progress on their pathway towards a circular future for plastics. And it's these insights, it's these learnings, that's what's most valuable to this conversation with Replastics. It's about all of us learning because we know that this is an ongoing journey. So Lawrence, maybe if you'd like to start with sort of a great example that you have of designing new systems for packaging.
Thank you, Sam. Here's a couple of good examples of companies that understood their own strategies, their own values, and where they wanted to be. They recognized they were on a journey about sustainability and the environment. And if you look at the Harmony brand there, which is the neat meat company, they have done a lot of work with their farmer growers, both in terms of animal welfare, the pasture, and protecting the waterways. Their business model up until that point was around B2B, dealing directly with the hospitality trade. They wanted to diversify into B2C so that these products ended up on the consumer plate. And so they developed a strategy and a mantra around from farm gate to plate. So through the whole B2B, they had most of that sorted. The missing piece into the plate was at the consumer end. What should that packaging look like? So we sat down and looked at what they wanted to achieve. Traditionally, they started off in 100% oil-based rigid trays, and that met a need to get the product into market, but that wasn't satisfying. That product could not be recycled. So they said to me, we wanted something that was sustainable and environmental. So in the case of the Harmony brand there, it started out with polyester and a plant-based material to be able to create the barriers they needed to meet shelf life expectations and food safety. It also had to go through their processing in the factory, and it also had to meet the supply chain needs. So quite a few complexities to be able to deliver that to the consumer in a safe, environmental way. So it started out with, like I mentioned, polyester and a plant-based material to achieve that. And through that journey, we can now say that over 90% of that product is from sustainable raw materials. It's using 80% rPET and the balance mainly in the plant base. So it's reducing the reliance on oil-based resins by over 90%, a huge story. So they're doing a lot more, we're doing a lot more work in that area. And through that journey with their online retail sales, they were using gel packs, the traditional blue gel packs for keeping the product cold. So we've developed a system where we've got now an ice pack, water ice. Because the gel, what does a consumer do with the gel pack? It only has a certain amount of turnaround. They slash it, it ends up going down the drains and into the waterways. They're microplastics. It's not good. The outer pack couldn't be recycled, so we developed a pack that could be recycled, and the water ice, end of life, you just slash it and the water goes down the drain. So they're doing a lot of work in that area. Moana, which is well known, they have also done a lot of work on sustainable farming and collection of fish. And so they picked up on the story of being able to meet sustainable and environmental needs. So both these packaging examples use sustainable raw materials and recycled polyester, plant-based, and can be recycled and achieve shelf life and meet food safety requirements. So the farm gate to plate, the sustainable fishing story, it fits in well with their whole company ethos now.
Yeah, awesome.
What's great about that Harmony example, Lawrence, is gel packs, right? So that's not just limited now to within their products. That's a solution that they can scale and offer to other New Zealand businesses who are, using the same systems. And
Quite
so you actually scale up and turn something that's a challenge into an opportunity, a business opportunity that also solve that problem across multiple industries.
Yep, and some of the seafood companies have already seen that and are starting to use it as well. Coming back to the Harmony label, which you can't see on the reverse there, they recognized that labeling was very, very, let's say, diverse, and they initially had messaging on their own words and recognized the consumer wasn't looking at it. So they end up signing up to the ARL. Very simple. You can now put that into your curbside collection. The logo actually tells you that. The consumer knows exactly what to do.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great melding of all of the thinking, all of the questions that you've highlighted and we've talked about today, starting with your values, understanding the functional needs, utilizing materials that exist and can be recognized, but also increasing demand for that recycling of materials in the system by utilizing them. So it's a perfect example, I think, of all of those coming together and then being delivered into our market, into our systems. And Ollie and Evan, I would love to hear about how you've seen similar opportunities and challenge and insights that you have with products in Aotearoa.
Yeah, cool. I mean, firstly, Lawrence, that's an awesome case study, and it really highlights the fact that sustainability it's not just environmental, it's social, and it's business as well. See, I'm coming more at this from the durables side, or the product rather than the packaging. And one case study I pulled out here is Husky. So Husky is a New Zealand company that is striving to be the premium drinkware, thermal technology drinkware brand in New Zealand and create the world's best beer cooler. When we started with them, we really got to know their brand values. They're a very customer-centric business, and those brand values are quality. And when you talk quality, it's like premium, but it's not luxury, it's attainable quality or attainable premium, innovation and forward thinking, but not complicating things. So ease of use and trustworthiness, honest, ethical and caring. So we started with a really good foundation for the Husky range of products. This example here was creating a new beer cooler. We needed to create a new beer cooler because the previous beer cooler wasn't living up to its function well enough. Otherwise, if it was, we wouldn't have bothered creating a new one. So when we set out to create this, it was about creating the best beer cooler in the world. And we really honed in on the customer's problems and pain points with the previous one. And we honed in on all the different types of bottles and cans in the world to see if we could make it fit all of them without compromising from one to the other. Just so you know, the smallest beer bottle is a Heineken, and the largest beer bottle, I think, was like a Cooper's or something, and about the same width as a can. But this is an interesting example because we actually had to make some compromises to achieve the result. For example, we have a soft and a hard plastic co-molded in that lid, which is not very recyclable. However, we couldn't achieve the function of the product without doing that. We tried numerous ways, I promise. And so that's where we had to weigh up, we can't compromise the performance and function of the product because this product is designed to last 4 years, for a lifetime. With that in mind, we're not going to be introducing lots of new garish colors. We don't intend to design a new one of these forever, unless bottles or cans change, or a whole crazy new material comes out that makes it possible to make it even better. So that's just one example where we had to focus on the product delivering value for a long time, and delivering it well, delivering it in style, and having timelessness. This next example here, do you want to talk a bit more about this one, Evan?
Yeah, I can drop my thoughts in on this one. This was an interesting little project that came to us where Zuru, they make obviously a lot of toys, and they had one particular product in mind where they wanted to essentially stack the product as tight as possible. We really, basically, I mean, the requirements around a buggy like this, a ride-on buggy, is pretty straightforward. But the one novel feature that we really were going to dive in on this one is how you can get it to stack as tight as possible. The main reason for that was to fit as many products as you can into a container. Basically, you can see through some of these images here is that we went through a lot of iterations to try come up with a design that really packed it as tight as possible. And we basically managed to estimate around 75% reduction in carbon emissions by packing as many as we can into this one container. Again, it's not really your prime sustainable example, but it is a way of showing how a product that you wouldn't really see as a flagship sustainable icon can be still, you can still implement little techniques to really reduce the impact of it, even though it is, you know, can be seen as a bit of a no-no.
I think this is a really good example of where we pretty early focused on one of the impacts of this product, and a big impact was how much shipping container space and therefore carbon footprint it had. And that's just purely what we focused on from the get-go. It's just like, how can you make these things stack like really tight? And that drove the whole product design, drove a whole lot of different decisions, and we had unintended consequences of the sort of the shape and style and design of the product is all driven by that one focus. And I think all of what we've talked about today is overwhelming. There's actually so many opportunities to improve a product and make it more circular. So I think it's important to try and slow down, go through the process to identify what the opportunities are, rationalize and choose the ones to focus on, and then just focus on them. Otherwise it can be too overwhelming. And this is kind of a good example of that. We're just purely focused on stacking.
Awesome,
I
thank
couldn't
you.
agree
I
more
think
on
it's
that one. I'll just quickly say I couldn't agree more on that one, Ollie, in terms of the singularity of problem solving, because like you say, it can be overwhelming when you're working with what is essentially a broken linear system and mindset with how we produce everything in the world. So it can be really overwhelming when you try solving that. So having one point of focus to start applying the strategies can then more easily be rolled out across other opportunities or other challenges. And if you have success in one area, it will generally create momentum across the subsequent challenges. And I also really love that in this example, it's not the obvious. You weren't looking at the materiality that was being used. You were actually looking at how to affect the impact of the transportation of it. And something that, you know, Rachel brought to us is it's not just about the product or the immediate packaging, it's actually also the transportation packaging. It's the packaging that consumers will never ever see, because it's from getting products from A to B, or potentially it's also the point of sale materials as well. So you can make a huge impact if you narrow in on one of those zones, not the core product.
Yeah, just picking up on Ollie's point there too, Bree. You can't solve it all at once. You have to focus on a particular area. And if I go back to the Harmony and the Moana examples, we knew where we wanted to be. We weren't going to do it on day one. It took 3 years, but we got there.
Yeah, totally. And these conversations are so important too for being able to share that. I mean, our Replastics is all about sharing those insights and learning so we can continue to build on the ideas and strength of others and solve one problem here and someone else solves another problem here, and then how you could bring those together. And so I think this slide sort of sums it up. It can be really hard to know where or how to start. Plastics it's a challenging, complex problem, but we really want to start shaping a future with lower emissions. We want to design out waste, and we all know we want to create a positive impact on our environment. And like all of us have said here today, starting is exactly what we all need to be doing. The fear of getting it wrong can sometimes inhibit us from making these really impactful changes. And so we've outlined a few simple steps in chapter 5 of the guide, so to help you define your actionable plan and give you those the support that you need to start to make this change a reality. And chapter 5 is called Shaping Your Plastics Pathway for that reason. It's taking you from the point now that you're equipped with the design tools, the considerations, to getting your business needs and having a clear plan to implement the steps for you.
And those 4 steps, if you simplify them right down, chapter 5 will help you look at building your capability and the understanding and what you can actually do within the space, and then move on to defining your impact. So in line with your values, what is the impact that you're seeking to make? What is that singular challenge that you're taking on? And then number 3, how do you design a solution for circular plastics in that space? How do you redesign what's actually possible with what you now know and what you can innovate in the future? And then we've got number 4, make it real. So this whole program, this Replastics conversation, is about making real change and making that progress. So we're wanting to invite everybody to join us at the training day to work through this process, uncover those design problems, help iterate on those design solutions, and bring the collective learnings and expertise to make that real. And that's the roadmap right there. So this is part of the bigger Replastics journey, which Sam, I'll throw to you on.
Yeah, so really I think to wrap sort of the process up, you've gone through each of the chapters, you've worked through how you might eliminate, circulate, or innovate, you've started to think about your roadmap. But you want others to come with you on this journey. You want help. You want to continue the conversation with experts. You want to continue the conversation with others who are in a similar place. You can see around us that who's been on this call with us today, we all have a number of different quite complex challenges. And so the training day is your opportunity to come together and to start putting your knowledge into action and making a circular solution possible. We'll work with you to align your priorities to uncover the most impactful challenge that you can seek to design a solution for, and then design that solution and start to define your actions. So basically, we're going to take what you've learned from that guide and apply it directly into your business and the challenges that you face. In the meantime, we highly recommend you head along to the Replastics LinkedIn group where you can ask your questions. If you have a question, there's going to be so many other people who have the same question. So we highly recommend that you post it in there so that we can all continue to learn together. I know that every time I talk to Rachel, I learn something new. And so I'm sure you're all in the same boat. So if we can share her knowledge and the knowledge of each of us in this LinkedIn group, we're going to go a lot faster. And then there's also Circular Connect, which has been designed by Plastics New Zealand to help support businesses. You can access funding, which is often sort of that first step to getting the conversation going internally, discovering what the opportunity is and starting to demonstrate what a solution could look like. This is a really helpful place for you to go to get those wheels turning internally and build your coalition of the willing. So if you haven't already, please register your interest on the Replastics website. It's where you'll find the guide, and we're looking to have this in the week of the 6th of May, and it'll be an in-person workshop.
And as part of the registration, we'll be providing more detail in chapter 6 as well around the pathway that you'll be shaping. So you'll be able to do a bit of pre-work prior to the training day. So we're really looking forward to seeing more and more businesses transform our impact collectively and individually by reshaping how we use plastics to be circular. And as we've touched on as well, we really hope to see these innovations go far beyond positive environmental impact to realizing new economic value and also creating social benefits for your organization and your communities. So it's really exciting to see the traction that Replastics is making. And we hope to continue the discussion. So if there's any questions.
Of course, we've only got a couple of minutes for questions. So I wondered if anyone has any questions that they would like us to answer here. If you pop it in the chat now, then we can do that. But what we'll also do is we did receive a few questions before the webinar as part of that registration. So if we don't get to them now, because we want to get you away at 1:30. I'm sure people are waiting for their lunch. We will slowly start to answer those through the LinkedIn group, so that everyone again can continue to benefit from your question and the insights of that answer. Was there anything in particular in the chat that we maybe wanted to answer first, Rachel?
I've been having a very interesting conversation in terms of durable products and over molding. So you think about a toothbrush that's got multiple different materials. You've got a hard plastic with a soft touch plastic that comes together. There's a lot of products that are like that. And it can be really challenging to recycle because you can't separate those different materials. This is one of the areas where this the redesign aspect and the rethinking really comes into play. You know, you actually do need to challenge the way that things have been done and have been developing over the last decades. For a long time, we were focused on design for assembly and making things as efficient as possible to manufacture for the lowest cost possible. We're now flipping the story to designing for circularity. So right up the front, actually thinking about, well, how do we separate these things at the end? You know, is overmolding the right solution for this particular product? But say you've got something that has to have a waterproof seal on it and it has to be part of the product and overmolded. Well, what else can you do? You know, is there a way that you can make sure those materials are compatible so they can be recycled together at end of life? Can you, as a brand owner, actually create a product that uses those materials? You know, can they be recovered and brought back through product stewardship for use back into your own products? Can you actually reuse those? You know, think about, let's take a cell phone. I don't think anyone's actually done this, but, you know, so if that case is actually made so that it is very durable, can that company actually take the phones back and then reuse that case to make a new phone? You know, can things be refurbished, reused? You know, there's different systems that can happen. And also, as a brand and a product developer, can you actually be involved in the research to develop the recycling solutions? You know, if you think about some of these major global brands in particular, they're actually investing into recovery systems, into chemical recycling, for example. And by doing that, they're actually also going to get access to those recycled materials so that they can use them back into their products. But, you know, there's an awful lot that can happen in terms of a systems approach with some of this.
Yeah,
so that probably took up all of our time. Sorry, Sam.
Well, I think what that leads itself to as well is, I mean, we know that there is investment opportunities now, right, with the Plastics Innovation Fund. And what's that's really looking at is scaled solutions. So again, coming together, like Rachel has said, thinking about who you can connect with and actually to scale the types of solutions that we have. This is the training day might be your first step to doing that, connecting with other brands, connecting with others in your industry to design a solution that then you could be looking to funding, but also investing in yourself. So creating new forms of value. I am going to wrap us up at 1:30 because I'm sure we all have other meetings and lunch booked in. But before we do that, I just really want to thank everyone that's joined us, all of you that have joined us here today for a longer extended webinar. Of course, Rachel and the Plastics New Zealand team for leading this really, really important conversation. And then Lawrence, Ollie and Evan. It's just been totally awesome to have you. There's insights in my mind, questions that I'm going to be looking at when I look at a toothbrush and a toy. They'll never be the same again for me. So I hope it's a similar experience for all of you. And Bree and I and the team at Circularity are just thrilled to be involved in this. And we look forward to seeing you on the training day and in the LinkedIn community.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sam, and all. Great to be on.
Kia ora.